At a time when information continues to come at us faster and faster, sometimes you need to hit pause and rewind. NPR's Throughline takes you back in time to the source of the news stories filling your feed. Find NPR's Throughline wherever you get your podcasts.
The field of mental health counseling is growing rapidly, and Richmont Graduate University can equip you with everything you need as a licensed professional counselor while integrating your faith into your clinical practice. Programs are offered in Atlanta, Chattanooga, and online. Apply today at richmont.edu. That's RICHMONT.edu.
Welcome back for another edition of Political Breakfast, our second one this week. And I don't know, a lot of us have been complaining about the post office.
Yes.
Tharon is here, Brian is here, and I don't know if you've been having the same worries and troubles I have, but I've been waiting for an invitation that a friend sent me a month ago that still has not arrived, still has not arrived. So now Senator Jon Ossoff is on the case, I hear.
That's right. There was a story in the media here over the weekend about what Senator Ossoff is trying to do to get the USPS to be more responsive. And I'm telling you, as a small business person who depends on checks coming to me from clients, and as somebody who pays subcontractors in the mail with checks, we have had tremendous problems. Going back until it started kind of in the fall, I would send checks through my bank bill pay, and they would never arrive. I would send another, that one wouldn't arrive. I would have a check coming from a client that never arrives. And one thing that I've noted, and I suggest this, I get this thing called USPS Informed Delivery. Every morning I get an email from the Postal Service showing what mail is supposed to come to my house. So I know when it's not there and it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And what I found is that when it doesn't come on that day, it never comes. It's not just a matter of delayed mail. It is a matter of never delivered mail. And, you know, I texted Jon Ossoff over the weekend, last weekend, when that stories came out. And I always point out, I know Jon because of Tharon. I met Senator Ossoff at Tharon's house a few years back. And he was responsive to this. I want him to stay on it because the Postal Service is going to collapse because normal people are going to quit using it. The magazine industry is going to collapse. I get magazines that are weekly, a week and a half later now. They're worthless when they arrive at my mailbox. So
it's terrible. It's terrible. I have friends who work for the post office, but I try to stay away. I'll pay the extra money and go to UPS because it's so bad. Why don't you use PayPal? Can you use PayPal, or is that not good business practice? Zelle? I don't know.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start moving toward that. Absolutely.
You know, B-Rob, I saw the senator last Saturday when President Biden was in town, and we chatted briefly, and I promised him I was going to do something that I should have done sooner, and that is commend him on his choice to bring Pedro Cherry, who is the CEO and president of Atlanta Gas and Light and Chattanooga Gas, and he invited him to the State of the Union as his guest. And, you know, there's been a lot of back and forth and talk about whether or not Senator Ossoff is pro-business. So you can't get more pro-business than that, which is a unique ability and privilege that the senators have to invite people up. But to invite the Georgia Chamber chair to come to the State of the Union shows his commitment to business. And then secondly, B-Rob, I'm glad that you reached out to him, and I know he responded. That's one of the things that this
he did.
Is very good at. He's very responsive. Now, it maybe drives his staff crazy sometimes.
I'm sure it does.
Shout out to him.
Yeah, I'm sure his staff hates me.
He's always at the ready. Always at the ready.
But Lisa, I think you're absolutely right, and I agree with Brian. I mean, look, I depend heavily on the mail as well. Those checks coming in the mail. Brian, remember, we have a lot of clients that refuse to go to an ACH program, or they don't want to do it through QuickBooks. They like to get those checks, and so them being delayed was good. But the other thing that really talked to my wife about during the holidays, I mean, we were still getting returned Christmas cards this month. So this is just another issue that I think that can hit home in a nonpartisan way with Georgia voters, that this senator will be able to talk about him being sort of in the leadership role to tackle. And so I definitely think he definitely deserves some spotlight in that. But also I would love Brian to keep us informed of what's the outcome going to be.
Yeah, well, I want to encourage people. I don't ever do this on this platform, but because it is just one of these bread and butter things that impacts our lives day to day. Contact your member of Congress, whether a Republican or a Democrat, and say, join this effort to get it fixed. Back in the end of the last decade, Karen Handel was my local congresswoman, and our local post office just kind of quit delivering mail some days. I mean, literally, they just never came. And she stepped in and knocked some heads and got some changes done. But obviously, it's not taking on the entire systemic issues that we're facing now.
Yeah. Tharon, you talked about the Biden rally. And this week, the AJC came out with a report that a lot of Georgia lawmakers, Democrats in particular, are afraid that President Joe Biden may not get over the hump in November. What are your instincts here? What are you hearing? Is there any truth to this?
Well, Lisa, this is one of these questions I knew was going to come, and I'm sure Brian is anxious to hear what I'm going to say. Because if I don't sound as upbeat as I should, I'm sure they're going to say, "Oh, Tharon is worried." Lisa, when I read that article earlier in the week, I had to really go back and remember where we were 4 years ago. So as you often mention on this podcast, I had the honor and privilege of serving as one of the senior advisors to the Biden-Harris campaign. And I remember vividly in March of that year, 2020, Florida and North Carolina were the two battleground states that were ahead of us. And in Georgia, we were in the mix, but we were not the top battleground state. So as April and May and June sort of showed that there was momentum here, right? The polling numbers started to get a little tighter and we were staffing up. That's when the Biden campaign made a very important strategic decision to shift a lot of the resources from North Carolina and Florida and Virginia a little bit and start really focusing on Georgia. So I believe that that's happening now. I think that the Biden-Harris campaign ultimate goal is to get to 270 electoral votes. There's no way that he would have picked Georgia to come as the state immediately after his great performance at the State of the Union if they did not think Georgia was in play. Now, what some of these Democrats are expressing, and I always say this, Lisa, it's all about the money. You got to follow the money. He has Jonay Wartell here, who we talked about on this podcast, a very talented young lady who's been in Democratic politics nationally. She's Georgia born, Georgia raised. She's on the ground. She's planning these rallies. They're staffing up. What I think the Biden-Harris campaign is feeling is that people want to make sure that they feel the money. They feel that the resources are being spent here. But I guarantee you this. The campaign is hearing this from Michigan. I guarantee they're hearing it from Ohio. They're hearing it from Florida, North Carolina. So every battleground state will make a campaign to really and to try to get more money out of the national campaign to spend more money in their states. Now, if we're having this conversation in, say, June, Lisa, and I haven't seen a sizable staffing up on the ground, like we don't have regional offices set up across the state where we coordinate with the parties for door knocking. And then I think if, we get to maybe August or September and there's not a significant media buy, meaning we're not going on the airwaves or we're not going on digital and radio, then to me, that's when I think I'll start to concern. But I just want to remind our fellow Democrats that this is a process. This is an incumbent president. They do have staff in Georgia. We do have a new executive director of the Democratic Party. But it always happens when a president comes to your state and leaves. Then if they don't feel like you left a lot here, like you haven't left a lot of not just yard signs, but they want to feel the organization. That's always sort of the thing that people push back on.
Yeah, I was going to say Representative Nikema Williams says she's not worried. She says it's up to the local election advocates now to do their work here on the ground. Right. What are you feeling? Yeah. What are you feeling, Brian?
Well, that's what Nikema's paid to say, right? She's the chair of the Democratic Party here. She's got to have a positive face. But some of the factors on the ground are not very positive for the Democrats. And I encourage people to listen, maybe go back and replay what Tharon said, because he is dead on. He just gave you a class on what to look for. Look at when Democrats start spending money here in Georgia, or if they don't start spending serious money here. Tharon is the guy who's talking to these people and the Biden folks, talking to the D.C. Dems. I am not. I trust his judgment on it, but I can look from the outside and know a little bit about what they must be thinking. I also can look at the polling that's out there and say, they've got better opportunities in other states than they do in Georgia. And Georgia's had a fairly consistent lead for Trump for some time now. That's got to be concerning if they think there's lower hanging fruit in Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, for example. So I did have one little bit of insight, something I want to mention. I was on a political panel in Savannah a few weeks ago, and there was a Democratic consultant on there, someone who advises Vice President Harris, someone who has been involved as an advisor to the Biden administration, someone who's a talking head on cable news. And he said Georgia is not in the top 7 targets for Democrats. And he was saying, went on to say that North Carolina was a better target. I think that's ridiculous. North Carolina's numbers are even worse for the Democrats than they are in Georgia. But going back, I'll let Tharon have the final say on that because he's right. Follow the money. If they don't start doing major spend in Georgia, they're writing it off.
You love free. And at Ameris Bank, so do we. That's why we're proud to offer worry-free, hassle-free Ameris Bank free checking. Manage your money your way with convenient access to digital, mobile, and telephone banking, all with no monthly service fee or minimum balance requirements. At Ameris Bank, we're with you. For more information or to open an account, visit our local bankers in person or online at amerisbank.com/free checking. Other fees such as overdraft fees may apply. Ameris Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
Support comes from the Grady Health Foundation, presenting Move for Grady Saturday, April 27th. When you ride, run, or walk for Grady, you help our entire community thrive. There's a distance for everyone, and all proceeds benefit Grady Health System. More at moveforgrady.com.
So I was going to say, we've been hearing for years now that Georgia's this premier battleground state, and then suddenly it's not? I mean,
no.
What's happening here?
That's not what's happening. So real quick, and I'll do this. So in 2012, Lisa, as you know, I was the Southern Regional Director for the Obama re-election campaign. Jim Messina, who was the campaign manager at the time, when I first got to the headquarters, he put a bag of oranges in my chair. I think I maybe told this story before on the podcast. And it was some Florida oranges, right? And he had a little handwritten note to me and said, "Don't F this up," right? Meaning that Florida was the state we had to win. And so my little crazy 30-plus-year-old butt was up there saying, "But what about Georgia? What about Georgia?" And the campaign manager was like, "Listen, we won Florida and North Carolina in 2008, and we're going to win it again." And unfortunately, we won Florida in 2012 and haven't won it since. And we lost North Carolina. So what happened in 2020, Lisa, is those next 8 years, this is where Georgia Democrats deserve a lot of credit. And there's too many people to name. I mean, it's funders, it's donors, it's people who ran unsuccessful for statewide races, different constituency groups. We convinced the Biden-Harris campaign that Georgia was a true battleground state. And because they invested kind of towards the end, but it was significant, that's how we were able to win, because we had built upon what others had basically kind of, put forth the infrastructure. So let me be very clear on this podcast. Georgia is a battleground state. I don't know this consultant that Brian was mentioning. He did, text me after that. And I think that consultant is wrong because
I did too. For what it's worth. I agree with you.
Yeah, because we won the state before in 2020. And I think we can win it again in 2024. And so when I say follow the money, let's not forget also that the Biden-Harris campaign made a significant nationwide media spend about 2 months ago. Brian heard me talk about this when we were on CNN. They spent money on Black Hispanic radio with a sizable buy. I mean, this was a digital and radio buy. It was the biggest buy that far out from a campaign ever. So they have made the investment in Georgia. I think what they're really trying to figure out right now, and it's really simple. What is our pathway to 270, right? There is no way that they're going to abandon Georgia. They're going to put some resources here. They're going to compete. But I think if it gets to a point where the other Midwestern states, the blue wave, as they like to call it, need a little bit more resources to kind of get over the hump, then I think you'll probably see the money come in a little late to Georgia. Because look, they know that they can win Georgia. They know that we put together the coalition, the Biden coalition I talk a lot about, and we got two fairly popular U.S. senators that can also hit the ground running, and along with the congressional delegation, our mayors and everybody else to help them win it. So I want to be very clear. I think that you're going to see some hires in the next month. You'll see in the next 30 days, they'll start staffing up with people on the ground. And correct me if I'm wrong, B-Rob, I don't think Trump has made any significant hires in Georgia yet. So you'll see the hiring process happen quicker. When I say follow the money, what I mean by that is when they start making those national buys, it's all public record, Georgia will be in those buys, right? But I think what the Biden-Harris campaign has a reputation for is that they want to ramp up at the end, and B-Rob knows this, once you go up on television, once you go up on radio and digital, you don't want to come down. The worst thing you can do is spend all this money and then come off, right? So
Right.
when I talk about them going a little later, I think they just want to build up the momentum in the right way. And there's a pre-convention strategy and there's a post-convention strategy too. We got to get through the convention. We haven't talked about this on the podcast. They're going to put the money here. And yes, we're a battleground state. And you want to know how I know, Lisa? Just like B-Rob, I'm getting inundated every week with 3 to 4 media requests about Georgia.
Okay.
And I think Brian takes a little bit more of them on Fox News lately. He's been looking good. He's been posting. During the legislative session, I can't just stop at 14th Street or one of those studios and put makeup on and go do those interviews. But I think he would contest. We are both getting a lot of questions about Georgia, about Trump, about Biden, and about the election in November 2024.
These days, they now send you a mobile studio. Like that, there's a van that comes to you. You walk down from your office, hop in, do the hit, get back out. It's like you're in a studio. It's awesome.
Go back to work.
Go back to work. Yeah, it's great. As far as the Trump campaign here in Georgia, they don't have a state director moving just yet. But Billy Kirkland, who lives in Forsyth County, was a staffer to Pence in the last administration and still very involved in Trump world, will have a major role in the Georgia campaign. He's in Mar-a-Lago a lot. You see his clients, Tyler Harper, the agriculture commissioner, and Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones down at Mar-a-Lago a lot. That's the Billy Kirkland connection. Billy's a great guy. Here's what the Democrats have to do here in Georgia. And I don't think for the Republicans there's quite the urgency right now because they do have this lead and it's kind of out of the margin of error, over 5%. So it's not necessarily front burner at the moment, but it will be because those numbers are going to tighten a little bit. But here's what the Democrats have got to do. 2 things. One, Tharon, let's talk about white, college-educated women in the Atlanta suburbs. I've always said it's white people in the Atlanta suburbs, is men and women, who abandoned the Republicans and voted for Biden in 2020. The Democrats have got to keep them or bring them back. Some of them we know are unhappy with their choice in 2020. There's some buyer's remorse. They're not happy with the way that Biden has governed. And we talk a lot about the Biden having legislative accomplishments, and he does. But a lot of those are very much progressive goal legislation that might offend or not appeal to some of those white moderates in Atlanta. And 2, they've got to bring back some of the African-American vote that is abandoning them. I don't think that they're going to have a whole lot of success with the Latino and Asians that are now 50-50, but they do have to bring back some of the black vote. You're seeing Trump consistently getting in the 20s. I have said I do not believe that it's going to end up in the 20s at the end of the day. But if it does, Trump's going to win very comfortably here. I think black vote toward Kemp is how he got to a 7-point lead in the 2022 election. It was a major part of that victory. Tharon's shaking his head. But
yeah, I was going to say, Tharon, is it really that far gone when it comes to the minority vote and its support for Biden?
B-Rob comes on this podcast every week, and I've called him out. And yes, to our listeners, B-Rob got a lot of black friends. He does. He got a lot of black friends. And no, he does, and he talks to black women. I mean, we know that. And Karina, I don't mean that, in a personal way. I mean, he does it, and the same thing I do, right? B-Rob knows this. I spend an enormous amount of time talking.
With a name like Karina Robinson, you would assume that she is in fact black, but she's not.
Well, look, I'm scared of Karina. I'm not going to say anything bad about her. No, look, Lisa. First of all, Brian Kemp is no Donald Trump. All right. Did Brian Kemp get some unexpected black voters? Yes, because why? He worked at it. I think I said this one time. Last time I saw the governor right before the campaign, he said, "Hey, I'm going to be in the neighborhood," right? And I kind of teased him. I said, "Well, governor, we say to be in the hood," and it's because he put the work in, right? He did.
Right.
I mean, and so Trump is not doing that. And I think that if you ask any black voter how you feel about Brian Kemp, how you feel about Donald Trump, when I tell you the hatred. Black voters despise Trump. You don't get as much of that for Kemp. So I think to compare Kemp numbers to what he got at Donald Trump is like apple and oranges because the effort is not there. And I think Trump is way more polarizing, way more divisive, way more says a lot of things that could be perceived as racist and more perceived as bigotry than Brian Kemp. But what Brian and Republicans are trying to do is that they're opening the door to black voters because they do know that there's just, like anytime, hey, we're looking to see, hey, what have you really put in our community and how's it affected? And that's why when you see Governor Wes Moore in town last Saturday, right, the only black governor in the United States of America, not only in Georgia, campaigned in Atlanta, but he went to Columbus, Georgia. I think he even made a couple trips in Middle Georgia. So we're going to solidify the black vote. We're not going to let the Republicans spread all these mistruths about Donald Trump and his commitment there.
Yeah.
And so, no, the one thing I have to consistently, I know we're wrapping up, the one thing I have to consistently push back on is black voters are not leaving the Democratic Party because they like Trump. Like, there's a lot of white voters who are leaving the Republican Party because they want something different, right? I think a lot of people are up for grabs. But what the Democrats are doing, I'm very proud to see this, we're quadrupling down on black voters and telling them the list of accomplishments with the president. And then also we need to push back on a lot of this Republican rhetoric that black voters were doing better during Trump years versus Biden, and then that all of a sudden Trump is getting on the support. It's just simply not true. And I think the comparison to what Kemp got versus Trump is not going to happen. And I will go on the show to say this. I made the bold prediction about Jeff Duncan. I made some other bold predictions as well. I'll make this prediction. And Lily, let's timestamp this one, ready? Because I don't want us to have to go back and try to find it in November. I said this in March 21st. I said this, right? Is that Donald Trump will not get 20% of the black vote in Georgia. It's just not going to happen. Now, even though he's polling those numbers, I just don't believe there's 20% of people in Georgia, black people, that are going to vote for Donald Trump, because we haven't yet seen the divisiveness. He's going to say something so disrespectful to the black community, Lisa. Mark my word on it. It's coming. It is coming. He already just confused. He just really, I got to get this in. B-Rob, I always want to talk about Biden. He just got on the microphone, Lisa. We're not even talking about this. And said that Joe Biden beat Barack Hussein Obama. I mean, now, you like to call my guy old and can't remember stuff and he's not all there. Trump is doing the stuff worse. I mean, and not only did he say he quadrupled, and then we're not even talking about his vice president. His own guy said last week, I can't
stand by him.
I can't stand by because he put my family in harm's way. I think that whole thing about Uncle Joe being old, it's out the door. Like that, Trump old too. Trump mind gone. If you say Joe got some problems, Trump got problems too. And I think you're going to see a rebellion of Republicans, because Mike Pence, to me, said something that no other Republican would say. I saw U.S. Senator Cassidy on Meet the Press last weekend refused to actually say that he was going to vote for Donald Trump. He decided I'll vote for the Republican, won't endorse him. You're going to see Republicans wake up and have some backlash on Trump pretty soon. Guarantee it.
That is a bold prediction, and yes, let's take a look back, because I'll do the same. I'll match Tharon. I agree it's not going to be above 20%, and we'll never know scientifically. I do think, though, that let's just go on whatever the exit poll show in November, but I do think that Trump will get in the high teens with Georgia black voters, largely black men, because these numbers can't hold, particularly if the economy gets better. A lot of the folks who aren't happy with Biden because they feel like their bacon and eggs cost too much at the grocery store, if that begins to change a little bit, I can see some folks, white voters too, kind of coming back to the Democratic fold. But I do think Republicans are making some real inroads. And one thing that Tharon talked about with Brian Kemp going to the neighborhood, one thing Brian Kemp did that absolutely impressed me was he went and did a town hall at, I believe it was at Tharon's alma mater, Clark Atlanta. If it wasn't there, it was at Morehouse, but it was at the Atlanta University Center. And I believe Killer Mike was involved in that as well, if I recall correctly. And he had no reason to think that he was going to get a welcome reception, but he got a very polite reception. And I think there was a lot of admiration in that crowd for him showing up and telling his story. It did help that I think a lot of that audience, like the rest of Georgia, appreciated what he had done on COVID, and they appreciated what he had done on the 2020 election. But that's something Republicans are going to have to continue to do, is show up. No, there might be some hostility in the audience, but there's also an element of that audience that is very receptive, that is willing to listen to you, and showing up is a big part of the battle.
Brian Robinson is our Republican strategist. Tharon Johnson is our Democratic strategist. Thanks again, guys. We'll do it again next week.
Sounds good. Good to see you guys.
Thank you.
Sounds Like ATL is a music documentary series that takes an in-depth look at the artists amplifying Atlanta's famed music community. Built around a desire to highlight Atlanta's diverse and world-renowned music scene, each episode features unforgettable, intimate musical performances by fresh new musical guests, each with exclusive interviews about the stories behind their music. Listen to Sounds Like ATL Saturday evenings at 7 on WABE and WABE.org.
From WABE Studios, the podcast where they read stories is a new children's storytelling podcast featuring notable Atlantans and performers reading classic and contemporary children's books. Each episode contains a story meant to entertain, inspire, and inform young listeners. No screens required. The podcast where they read stories features adaptations from both chapter books and picture books. Join us at WABE.org/stories podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts.
WABE.